Hello, Cardinal families. Today I will be reading for you Cryptid Hunters, Chapter 26, Escape. Grace lay on the edge of Jean-Claude's green tarp, pretending to be asleep. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Butch walk over to his shelter and crawl into it like a bear returning to its den. The two men sat by the fire, quarreling about who would take the first guard duty. They finally settled it by cutting cards. Felipe lost with a 3 of diamonds to Jacques' jack of hearts. Soon the night animal sounds were mingled with Butch and Jacques' snores, and Felipe shuffling the deck of cards over and over again. If he didn't stop shuffling and fall asleep soon, Grace knew her plan was doomed. An hour passed, and the monotonous shuffling continued. She had put enough sleeping pill powder into their eggs to put 3 gorillas to sleep, but now she was worried that the powder hadn't mixed evenly, and Felipe hadn't gotten his share. She lay perfectly still, using Laurel's gaze anchoring technique to help pass the time and dull her terror. At the end of the wire, she saw herself safely back on the Cryptos with Marty, Wolf, and Laurel. They were gathered in the living room looking out the window at the Pacific Ocean. Oddly, boarding school was no longer in the picture. She couldn't imagine going back there now that she knew that Wolf was her father. She recalled the first time he had seen her and his look of astonishment, and the following morning when she caught him crying on the sofa in the library. How was he going to explain everything that had happened? No wonder he'd been so awkward around her. The shuffling finally came to a stop. Very slowly, she turned her head and breathed a sigh of relief. Felipe was slumped over, sound asleep. Grace got to her feet and started toward Butch's crude shelter. Mausolito moved through the jungle like a ghost, ducking under branches and clambering over fallen trees without a sound. Marty followed like a derailed locomotive engine, breaking branches, tripping, cursing, and hoping Mausolito was leading him to Grace. He still wasn't sure if his guide understood the big picture. After nearly an hour of this, Mausolito stopped and waited for Marty to catch up. Mausolito pointed to his pack and motioned for him to take it off. At first, Marty thought he was offering to carry it for him, which he didn't think was a good idea. The pack was nearly as big as Mausolito, but that wasn't what Mausolito had in mind. He took the pack and scraped it along the trees and vines and pointed to his ear. "I get it," Marty said. "It makes too much noise." Mausolito hung it on a branch, then pointed to Marty's machete. Marty shook his head. "No way. I need it to get through the jungle." Mausolito made wild slashing movement with his arm and pointed again to his ear. Marty sighed and hung the machete next to the pack. Mausolito squinted at him, then covered his eyes in mock pain as if he were being blinded. It took Marty a while to realize that he was referring to the headlamp he was wearing. "It's the only way I can see where I'm going." Mausolito continued his blind man charade. Okay, I'll compromise. I'll turn it off, but I'm leaving it on my forehead." Marty turned it off, wondering how long it would take him to smack face first into a tree. He wished he had brought a climbing helmet from the sky house. "If you ask me to strip down to my underwear, I'm not doing it, and I'm taking this with me." He opened the pack and took out a small sketchbook he had brought along. "I have a feeling I'm going to need it to talk to you later." Mausolito said something and scrambled up a tree like a gecko and disappeared. "Where are you going?" Marty called up after him, but Mausolito didn't answer. Marty sat down, leaned against the tree. As he swatted insects, he thought about Noah Blackwood. He still found it hard to believe that he was Grace's grandfather, or that Wolf was her father, for that matter. There must have been an important reason for his parents to have kept this secret all these years, but he couldn't for the life of him think of what it was. 20 minutes went by, and he began to wonder if he was supposed to have followed Mausolito up the tree. After another 20 minutes, he started to think that Mausolito had ditched him. He stood up and was about to start climbing when Mausolito dropped to the ground right in front of him. "You scare me to death." Mausolito smiled and squatted down in front of him and started pounding what looked like a chunk of vine with a rock. A terrible smell filled the air. "What's it for?" Mausolito looked up from his work, then made a buzzing noise and waved his hands around his head. "Bugs?" Marty looked around and saw that there wasn't any insect anywhere near them. "Wow." Mausolito took the ball of smelly pulp and started smearing it all over Marty's body. Despite the stink, Marty didn't resist. Not only was the juice keeping the insects away, but he felt instant relief from the itching that had plagued him for the past few days. Mausolito pantomimed that he wanted Marty to follow him closely through the woods, and to do everything that he did. At first, Marty had a hard time even seeing Mausolito in the dim moonlight, let alone mimicking him. But after a while, his eyes adjusted to the dark and the shadowy pantomime became easier. And he noticed something else. The farther they went and the faster they moved, the better he felt. Grace was experiencing the opposite feeling. She was in Butch's shelter, so close to him she could smell his breath. She had quietly searched his pack and every square inch of the shelter's floor, including the insides of 2 pairs of boots, and still had not found the gizmo. The only place she hadn't looked was in his pockets, which was why she felt so anxious. Twice he had stopped snoring, and Grace had held perfectly still until the terrible noise resumed. She knew Marty would approach this delicate operation much differently from how she was handling it. He would simply hit Butch in the head with a large rock, find the gizmo, and walk off with it. Grace had undergone a lot of changes in the past few days, but she could not do that. Butch was lying in the hammock, his shotgun resting across his chest. She surveyed the pockets, which she would have to search, trying to determine which would be most likely to contain the gizmo. He was wearing army fatigues and a baggy shirt. She reached for the first shirt pocket. The top flap was buttoned. With her heart in her throat, she gingerly pushed the button through the hole and slipped her fingers inside. Butch stopped snoring. She froze and held her breath. There was something in the pocket, but it was too big to be the gizmo. After what seemed like an eternity, Butch resumed his snoring, and Grace carefully pulled the object out. It was her moleskin, which she was glad to have back, but disappointed it wasn't the gizmo. The next pocket contained Butch's wallet. She moved down the hammock to Butch's cargo pockets. In the first, she found a folding knife, which she took, and in the second pocket, to her great relief, was the gizmo. Unfortunately, as she was pulling it out, Butch turned over, pinning her arm. When she tried to pull it free, the hammock swung toward her and Butch stopped snoring again. Now she wished she had that rock and went so far as to feel around for one with her free hand. Butch started snoring again, and her arm started going to sleep. She did not find the rock, but she remembered the knife. She opened a blade with her teeth and started cutting the hammock mesh, one square at a time, careful not to stab Butch, and hoping the whole thing didn't unravel and dump her, quote, guardian angel on the ground. The hammock held, and with tremendous relief, she took the gizmo and her moleskin back to the campfire. Felipe was still slumped over his spilled cards. Jacques was snoring away in his hammock. Jean-Claude had not moved, and to her dismay, the gray parrot had flown into camp and was hopping around the sleeping men. What if it started its terrible screeching? She prayed it wouldn't. Her immediate goal was to keep Butch and his men away from Wolf and Laurel. That's all that mattered right now. After that, she didn't know what she would do. She slipped the pack over her shoulders, then turned the gizmo on, relieved to find Marty's gray tag at the Sky House along with Bo's and PD's. For once in his life, he hadn't rushed to her rescue. She thought about contacting Wolf and telling him what was going on, but then thought better of it. There would be a time for that once she was safely away from camp. But as she started to leave, 2 hands clamped on her ankles and pulled her feet out from under her. She hit the ground and the gizmo went flying. Apparently, Jean-Claude was feeling much better. His hands felt like iron shackles. "Let go of me, you ingrate," Grace hissed in French. "I saved your life." Jean-Claude was surprised that she spoke French, but he did not let her go. The girl may have saved him, but the only way he was going to make it out of Lake Tulare alive was if Butch McCall deemed him worthy of being dragged out of the jungle. He tightened his grip. Grace kicked and clawed at the ground, but could not break free. She glanced in Felipe and Jacques' direction and saw they were both awake now, although moving very slowly. Her plan was coming apart before it even started. The parrot let out a loud screech, then hopped over and sunk his sharp black beak into Jean-Claude's remaining ear. Jean-Claude screamed and let go of Grace's ankles. Grace rolled away and got to her feet. There was a roar from Butch's shelter. He came stumbling out but didn't make it very far. His leg was tangled in the torn hammock, and he fell flat on his face. Grace looked around for the gizmo but didn't see it. She ran.